statewide organization known as the Act Against Hate Alliance is taking action. The goal of this organization is to stop hate crimes using any and all available methods. May Huff is a co-founder of the Act Against Hate Alliance.
Law enforcement must be a part of any effective solution, and this requires properly educating and training our officers at every level.
The Act Against Hate Alliance, or AAHA, is dedicated to looking for solutions. Los Angeles County reported 596 hate crimes in 2021 alone, which may be the highest number ever recorded, according to Supervisor Catherine Barger.
Since the pandemic began, hate crimes against Asian communities have skyrocketed. Blame for the virus has been unfairly placed on our Asian neighbors. Not only are they not at fault for this pandemic, they have been a force for help and for hope.
There is a solution to this problem. Louis Friedberg is convinced of that. Friedberg was a young reporter working in South Africa when he witnessed the end of apartheid in that country. He would later spend the better part of a decade as the director of EdSource in California.
If apartheid could be ended in South Africa, we should be able to figure out how to get over some of the racial and ethnic and other divisions that exist in California.
Supporting the efforts and contributions of law enforcement is considered to be another solution to stopping crimes of hate in California. Walt Allen directed the California Youth Authority under Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. He now serves as the director of the Rio Hondo Police Academy in Southern California.
What we try to do is provide guardianship education with a tremendous amount of cultural diversity training, principal policing, and procedural justice training as well. I think we've had some pretty good success.
The core mission of the Act Against Hate Alliance is to identify the root causes behind hate crimes and propose solutions to stop them. The organization was co-founded by former California State Senate Minority Leader Bob Huff and May Ho Huff. It is made possible through funding from the California State Library Stop the Hate Initiative.
So good morning, everybody. I'm former State Senator Bob Huff, and I am the program's MC today. The video you watched was a short edited version of some comments from last month's media briefing, which was put together by Bill Bird, our communications guy, and the video was edited by Ronnie Chung. Today's briefing is the fourth in a series of monthly media briefings hosted by the Act Against Hate Alliance with a grant from funding from the California State Library's Stop the Hate program. I'd like to turn the microphone over now to my wife, May, for a few opening comments. May?
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob. Good morning, everyone. I am May Huff, and together with my husband, Senator Bob Huff, we're honored to bring you this program and extend our deepest gratitude to all of you for your attendance and support. Senator Huff and I have both been very committed to public service throughout our careers. Hate crimes touch us all. We established the Act Against Hate Alliance to better focus on the deplorable rise in hate crimes. LA County's Commission on Human Relations issued its annual report last week, documenting a 23% jump in county hate crimes from the previous year. While the official report noted that Asian hate crimes once again recorded the largest percentage increase, local news coverage only gave a glancing reference without documenting the dramatic rise of 67% increase in hate crimes against Asian community, on top of 84% rise the previous year. One major implication of all hate crime growth is on the state's economic vitality, as fear of being victimized can affect businesses by making them targets, or by keeping customers away out of fear of being attacked. Act Against Hate Alliance goes beyond the talk to identify solutions, and to do so is bringing together stakeholders from every sector with a solution-specific focus. This program will consider the economic impact of hate crimes, and address their similarity to terrorism, and will also explore a more historical view of hate crimes and their targeted communities from the 1980s to present day. Back to you now, Bob.
Thank you, Mei. This past month, there was a terrifying attack on a gay nightclub in Colorado, which killed 5 and wounded 17 others. This is being tried as a hate crime, as you would imagine. While headlines are made regularly, quantifying the number of hate crimes that occur, as well as their rise and fall, can be quite confusing. Many of the less horrific crimes are not reported. Those that are reported may not go to trial. We heard in our first Zoom briefing from an Orange County prosecutor that for a hate incident to be tried successfully as a hate crime, a prosecutor has to prove intent. Some hate crimes that are tried but lose are hate incidents, and some hate incidents that aren't tried are surely unprosecuted hate crimes. Some jurisdictions only keep track of hate crimes, not hate incidents, while some, like LA County, record both incidents and crimes. Our data is not standardized. Mei talked a little of the 23% jump in LA County hate crimes from the previous year, but if you read the report, it's for the calendar year of 2021, and we're at the end of 2022. If you look at the Department of Justice website, you'll find their latest report looks at 2020. The FBI has 2021 data, but they collect only from 11,883 of 18,812 jurisdictions nationwide, or agencies nationwide. So let's just agree that quantifying hate incidents and hate crimes is difficult, but let's also agree that it is rising dramatically in recent years, impacting all of us in some manner, but of course, some much more than others. Our speakers today bring in to our discussion comments from different perspectives. We have a state elected official, a research professor, and a civil rights attorney. To our media friends, please log your name, organization, and email address in the chat so we can send you follow-up material related to this meeting. And also, please think of questions as our presenters are speaking and post them in the chat. When the presenters have finished, if we have time, I will either read your questions or call upon you to ask our presenters yourself. Please address any chat you post to everyone and not specifically to me or Mei. Our first presenter is California State Treasurer Fiona Ma. Fiona is California's 34th state treasurer. She was elected on November 6, 2018, and is the first woman of color and first woman certified public accountant elected to the position. The state treasurer's office provides financing for schools, roads, housing, recycling and waste management, hospitals, public facilities, and other crucial infrastructure projects that better the lives of residents. California is the world's 4th largest economy, and Treasurer Ma is the state's primary banker. Her office manages more than $2 trillion in banking transactions within a typical year and provides transparency and oversight for an investment portfolio of more than $124 billion. Prior to being elected treasurer, she was an elected member of the California Board of Equalization. Prior to that, the State Assembly, and prior to that, San Francisco Board of Supervisors, going back to 2002. Fiona has built a reputation of building coalitions to accomplish complicated goals. She has been a licensed CPA in California since 1992 and holds a bachelor's degree in accounting from the Rochester Institute of Technology in New York, a master's degree in taxation from Golden Gate University, in San Francisco, and an MBA from Pepperdine University. Fiona, the mic is yours. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Bob Huff and Mei Huff for stepping up and taking a lead in this initiative, the Act Against Hate Alliance. It is really devastating. My parents were both born in China. I am the oldest daughter of immigrant parents, and so I have always been very sensitive to the needs of the immigrant community in all of the different elected positions that I've played. And it is just, terrifying for our community, especially during COVID, where we have been trying to protect our elders. I live with my father, who's 88 years old, from the COVID, and then also needing to protect them when they are not at their houses and seeing the hate in Asian hate crimes. I do think, and I do agree with you, that we need more data and statistics. We are very happy when district attorneys are now digging into, these type of crimes and actually calling them what they are, Asian hate crimes, so that we can monitor and make sure that we are protecting our communities. I also recently helped the United Peace Collaborative start their nonprofit, get all their nonprofit paperwork in order. For the last 2 years, they have been creating and organizing volunteers to patrol the streets of Chinatown. They have been doing it 24/7. And thanks to organizations like yours and others, the Lions Club, different, the Parks Alliance, different neighborhood watch groups, crimes are going down, but they are still happening. Jewelry stores in San Francisco, Chinatown, still continue to face robberies. Teenage shoplifters are going around knowing the limit in terms of how much they can take from a store without being prosecuted. Elderly women especially have been still mugged and beaten on our streets. And so we all still need to be highly, highly vigilant of our communities. I'm very happy to report that in September of this year, Governor Gavin Newsom issued an executive order that established California's first Racial Equity Commission. This commission will recommend tools, methodologies, and opportunities to advance racial equity and will be available to provide direct assistance to state agencies in reviewing and updating policies and practices upon request. This is thanks to Senator Richard Pan, who is a fellow member of our California Asian American and Pacific Islander Legislative Caucus and collaborating racial equity organizations. 2 recent bills were also chaptered and signed by Governor Newsom. AB 2488 by Assemblymember Ting requires the state civil rights department to create a pilot program that would recognize businesses for creating safe and welcoming environments free from discrimination and harassment of customers. And the second by Senator Dave Min, SB 1161, requires the Mineta Transportation Institute at San Jose State University to develop a survey tool that transit operators can administer to develop data-driven initiatives to help prevent street harassment on public transportation systems. So I want to thank our API brothers and sisters for continuing to author, sponsor, and then get these bill signs that are going to help protect our community. And finally, in July, the state disbursed $30 million to continue to combat hate crimes around the state. California has funded a total of $110 million in anti-hate programs. So we thank the legislature and the governor for their ongoing commitment to protecting our neighborhoods. We thank again Senator Huff and May Huff for creating this organization to also increase the dialogue, raise the awareness, and also include the media so that they are reporting what is actually happening in, on our streets and in our homes. California is the 4th largest economy because of our great diversity. And when one of our communities is harassed, picked on, stereotyped, attacked, we all are going to face it. And so we all need to work together whenever any of our communities are facing travesties. And I thank everyone for being here to stop Asian hate crimes. Thank you all.
Thanks, Fiona, for joining us today. I know you have a busy schedule and you're off to another, I won't call it an event, but it is an event. But anyway, thanks again for joining us. It's a pleasure for you to spend some time with us and share your thoughts.
Thank you.
Our second presenter is Professor Adam Rose. Adam is research professor at the University of Southern California, Price School of Public Policy, and Director Emeritus Senior Research Fellow of USC's Center for Risk and Economic Analysis of Threats and Emergencies. Previously, he held faculty and department chair positions in applied economics departments at the Pennsylvania State University and West Virginia University, as well as faculty position at the University of California, Riverside. He received his PhD in economics from Cornell University, but has worked on interdisciplinary topics throughout most of his career. Professor Rose is the author of several books, 250 professional papers, and has been appointed to numerous editorial boards. It's our honor to have you on our program today. Professor Rose, the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much, Bob, for that introduction. I'll be speaking about the economic impacts of terrorism, sharing some of the research and policy advising I've done through the research center at USC known as CREATE, which now stands for the Center for Risk and Economic Analysis of Threats and Emergencies. For the first 16 years of our existence, it was the last two words were terrorism events, but we've always been an all-hazard center doing work on natural disasters as well, and hence the change of the name. By the way, can we get the PowerPoint slides started? Okay, so let's go to the second one. And here's a definition of terrorism. It's akin to most definitions. A terrorist attack is the threatened or actual use of illegal force and violence by a non-state actor to attain a political, economic, religious, or social goal through fear, coercion, or intimidation. And unfortunately, these attacks typically involve the killing of innocent bystanders beyond the focus of the original intent. And we have two major examples, one by foreign terrorists in terms of the September 11, 2001 tragedy that killed more than 3,000 people. And let's not forget the largest domestic terrorist attack, that of the Oklahoma City bombing that killed 168 people. So let's go to the next slide. To put things in perspective, these are the largest disasters of the 21st century, not including COVID and not including Hurricane Ian recently, but you can see at the bottom of that list, it's actually the first in chronological order in terms of direct impacts on gross domestic product. 9/11 stands out by far, and also in terms of the number of deaths as well. Hurricane Ian is pretty large, but doesn't come close to the GDP impacts. To give you some perspective, though, we've recently done some work on COVID, and the estimate is the GDP impacts there are as much as $5 trillion, and we all know that COVID has killed more than 1 million people, so that's not to be ignored as well. But you know, the largest disaster otherwise of the 21st century still is 9/11. Let's go to the next slide. In the 10th anniversary of 9/11, the New York Times published an article looking at various estimates of that event. And the first one, if we start with toll and physical damage, that's a combination of the value of the Trade Center and the death toll. That's on the order of 55 billion. And the Trade Center was on the order of, in 2011 dollars, 32 billion. The second set of cubes, economic impact of 123 billion, that's my estimate in a paper I published in 2009 of the direct and indirect GDP impacts of that event. But others have suggested that the economic costs of terrorism, especially the 9/11 event, are much greater if you factor in Homeland Security and related costs of establishing and running the Department of Homeland Security, 589 billion. The war funding, some people have suggested is applicable in terms of the war in Iraq. I realize that's highly controversial. It's not necessarily my position, but it's something that we should take into account. And that's on the order of 1.6 billion. And then future wars and future veterans care, almost $1 trillion as well. So let's go to the next slide. The studies we've done are very comprehensive in terms of case studies. We've used the most advanced economic modeling approaches and data, and we've developed something called the CREATE Economic Consequence Analysis Framework. And essentially what we looked at were previous impact analyses approaches that were typically used to look at something like opening a new mine or closing a Ford Motor Company factory. and found them very limited and not really applicable to, let's say, a terrorist event. And so 2 hallmarks of our approach that resonate and are key to understanding the economic impacts of terrorism are resilience and behavioral considerations primarily related to fear. And so in terms of resilience, we use the narrow definition, not upfront mitigation or interdiction, but how we rebound or bounce back. The Latin root of the term resilience is resilio, or to bounce back or rebound. And here we're talking about how people cope with an attack once it's taken place to reduce and minimize the losses. And in the case of terrorism, there's a strong motivation to try to demonstrate that the terrorists have not won. And we all give a lot of credit to the people living in New York City for various actions they took in that regard. But one of them is that 72% of potential business interruption losses, that's the loss of GDP or employment, for instance, following the World Trade Center attack, were prevented by the rapid relocation of tenants of the World Trade Center, both government agencies and private businesses, elsewhere in the area, primarily Midtown and across the river in New Jersey. So this was an action of people that really reduced the losses. And remember that bin Laden stated as one of his primary motivations bringing down the US economy. And he chose the trade centers partly because they were a symbol of the financial sector of the US economy and the strength of the US economy. So essentially, the people of New York showed the terrorists that they were going to get back to normal, get back to business as usual. And that had a great effect in reducing the losses and countering terrorism in the aftermath of the account. Unfortunately, fear comes into play as well, and you can't blame people in a traumatic situation for reacting. Because a terrorist attack can be psychologically overwhelming. And it turned out that of the remaining, and I think I quoted about $126 billion of losses in 2011 dollars in the previous slide, more than 80% of that was due to a nearly 2-year reduction in airline travel and related tourism, primarily foreign tourists coming to the US. So people were afraid to get on an airplane, and the fear got the best of them and had economic impacts on the order of $100 billion, a very great amount. And we are looking for ways to quell that fear of terrorism in the future in terms of what we call inoculation messages, which warn people about the terrorist activity and the harm it may bring about, but bounding that to what the actual estimates are and not letting people get carried away by fear, and then having messages thereafter about the safety of the situation and the efforts the government and private sector are doing in the hope that we can reduce that as well. So my next slide is a number of terrorist attacks in the US between 2000 and 2020. And it's very disconcerting to see this rise since 2013. And there are many reasons for it. Some people say it's easier now to report, but we all know also that Asians have been singled out much more than previously for terrorist attacks. And that's a serious problem we need to cope with. The final slide, and I gather these will be posted, are references to the research we've done at CREATE. I'll also revise this and put that New York Times article in there, but several papers in peer-reviewed journals that have stood up to scrutiny in terms of their accuracy and appropriateness. And we've got links there and refer interested people to those publications. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to hearing your questions and comments.
Great. Thank you, Professor Rose. We appreciate your comments there. And I have a couple of follow-up questions, but we'll do that later on during the question time. So our next presenter is the Honorable John Duran. John was served on the West Hollywood City Council for 20 years. He was appointed by Lieutenant Governor Leo McCarthy to the California Hate Crimes Commission back in 1988 when he was just a wee little pup, a young attorney. John was a co-founder of the Life AIDS Lobby in 1987 and chaired the board of directors from 1987 to 92. He was a co-founder of Equality California in 1999 and chaired the board of directors from 2001 to 2008. He's also served on the boards of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, Lambda Legal Defense Fund, and the ACLU Foundation of Southern California. He was the national chairman of the National Association of Latino Elected Officials Education Fund from 2015 to 2021. His political and legal careers have both centered around serving the LGBT community of Southern California. John, thanks for making time and welcome to our program.
Thank you, Senator Huff, and thank you, Mamie. Thank you both for asking me to participate this morning with you all. As the senator mentioned, I served on this California Hate Crimes Commission back in 1987. So I've kind of been thinking about all this for almost 40 years. And here's the sad reality. Hate crimes existed in 1987, and they're still with us in 2022, heading into 2023. So where does that lead us to believe? What do we think about that? Well, you know, I did 12 years in Catholic school, so I know just enough scripture to get myself in trouble. I'll say that. But if you want to go back and look over time, you will find evidence of hate crimes going all the way back, New Testament, Old Testament, all the way back to the days of Neanderthal man, when one tribe went up against the other because they were different from one another. So hate crimes or tribalism or the fact that I believe that you're different and therefore I must fear you has been part of the human condition for all recorded time. So what are we to do about that? Let's just take this apart for a second. Hate crimes. Besides being a civil rights attorney, I'm also a criminal defense attorney. So since we're talking about crime, let's talk about what that means under California law. A hate crime is not a separate crime. It is a special allegation in a criminal complaint to enhance the penalties or punishment when a crime is motivated by hatred towards another because of differences. There's always another underlying crime: assault, battery, assault with a deadly weapon, criminal threats. What used to be called terrorist threats is now called criminal threats, arson. Those are all the underlying crimes. And I've talked to prosecutors and law enforcement personnel, and they say, well, aren't all crimes somewhat motivated by hate? I say, well, okay, some of them are. Some are motivated by crystal meth. Some are motivated by poverty. Some are motivated by people trying to get money to fund their drug problem. So crimes aren't necessarily motivated by hate, although some are. So what happens when a hate crime occurs? What is the distinction between just a general crime, maybe motivated by hate, or a hate crime? Well, a hate crime is meant to terrorize a community of people, as Professor Rose was just alluding to in his presentation. It's meant to make people feel fearful in their synagogues, in their churches, in their neighborhoods, in their communities, in the places that they know one another, they know their neighbors, they know their institutions. It's to make fear perpetrate an entire level of community. And that's a little different than just a crime committed against an individual when the target is a community of people. So that's the crime part of it. Now let's talk about the other side, which is the hate part of it. You know, I've been in politics now for a very long time, over 40 years. And I guess if I found another system that would help improve the quality of people's lives, I go play that game. But I like the game of politics because I think it is possible to pass legislation and to have discussions like this and to have government work for its people in order to address issues like this. But there is another part of all this that sometimes doesn't get as much attention as passing laws or statutes. Are laws and statutes needed? Yes. Because if nothing else, they serve as a deterrent for others to make sure they don't commit hate crimes when they see somebody being punished. But really, there are cultural forces that are constantly at play that I think have a far bigger impact on how we come up against each other when our cultures begin to mix. You know, I'm a native Angelino. I was born and raised here. I was born in Lincoln Heights. I was raised in the Santa Fe Springs, Whittier area. And now I've been in West Hollywood for almost 40 years. But I've noticed something about my city, which is unique. about greater Southern California. We are truly a horizontal city rather than a vertical city. Vertical cities like New York or Chicago or San Francisco go up. And people have the opportunity to mix and mingle on subways, on trains, on mass transit. I'm hesitant even just to get somebody in my car to get in the carpool lane. I'm pretty much a solo driver every day. So I don't get the opportunity to mix and mingle with people in different cultures in the greater Los Angeles area. We're a horizontal city, and we have our neighborhoods even identified: Little Armenia, Little Russia, Chinatown, Japanese side of town, the Jewish West Side, South Central, the Valley. We've identified our neighborhoods based upon sometimes some of our differences in demographics. And so I think it's always exciting, for me anyway, to go eat in Little Ethiopia or to go to another place that I'm not familiar with in order to experience that culture. But what happens when we have this, tribalism come up, where the other or the person that is different is to be feared or hated rather than something to be celebrated in terms of, look at all the great cultures and religions and ethnicities that make Southern California as diverse as it is. Well, then we get to something really very different, a sort of cultural jingoism where people just want to adhere to their own insular neighborhood, and everything else is something to be distrusted. The Old Testament, talks about the Tower of Babel, where, humankind tried to build a tower up to the skies, up to heavens. And in order to confuse them, God created many different languages so they couldn't speak to each other. We are living, I think, in a modern Tower of Babel, and it's being amplified by social media, by TikTok, by Instagram, by Twitter, by Facebook, where we no longer have our, ABC, NBC, and CBS networks with our daily newspaper. Now we have hundreds of forms of communication available to us with no railings, with no guardrails, where truth suffers and disinformation can be found everywhere across all these networks of communication. It is the perfect fertile field for hate crimes to develop. When I only talk to people who look like, think like, act like me, if I was to only do that and live in that sort of an insular world, well, then I would be subjected to misinformation, disinformation, lies, myths about other people, about other cultures that could take root in me and make me want to act out in a way that crosses the line of criminality, to act out against people who are different. And I think that's the problem that we're seeing. I mean, ultimately, it's nice that yes, we need to collect statistics. We just saw the FBI undercounted hate crimes nationally by leaving out LA and New York. We know we have to keep track because we need to figure out how the government can properly target its resources to address hate crimes in this state and across the country. But beyond that, we have to eventually get to the root causes of all this. And the root causes aren't really our diversity or our cultural complexity. The root causes are the miscommunication and the revival of old prejudices. And it doesn't just come from the right wing of American politics and culture. That sort of intolerance can also be found, I think, in the left wing of American culture and politics. I'm a political moderate. I am like I think I'm unfortunately an endangered species politically because, I consider both sides to be a threat to my American liberty and freedom. But those of us in the center, we just want everyone to get along. And whether we come from different parties or different religions or different cultures, can't we find a common place for us to get to know a little bit more about one another rather than looking as one another as being different and therefore to be distrusted and hated? And so I think, as we begin to look at ways to address the root of hate and the root of these causes, are we ever going to completely eliminate hate crimes? Sadly, I think the answer is no. I think the answer is no, just based on human history and human conflict through all recorded time when there have been religious differences, tribal differences, cultural differences. But I do believe that if we link arms, people of good nature and good grace, link arms with one another and say, there are more of us than there are of those who would choose to try to hate any particular group of us. And it does me no good if I just stand up for LGBT people and completely ignore anti-Semitism, or if I just stand up for Latino immigrants and don't think about Asian immigrants or others who are coming from other places. It makes more sense for me to lock arms with people who are different but have the same goal. And eventually there'll be enough of us, I believe, that will make some progress on this issue. We may not eliminate it, but progress is what I think is achievable and hopefully will be part. I think we're going through another cycle right now of extremism in our politics, and it's being amplified through social media, which is something we didn't have when I served on the hate crimes back in 86, 87. All I had to worry about were the LA Times, the Orange County Register, and the three big networks in terms of communicating things, ideas out to people. Now it's not possible to cover all the possible modes and mechanisms of communication. So it becomes like the modern day Tower of Babel. And I think it becomes much more complex for those of us who care about this and want to address this. But that is what we have to do. So I'll leave with that. And I'm just so happy and excited to see so many different representatives of different media outlets here listening in and participating. Because I think ultimately that's what we need to do, get the word out and get it out broadly. So thank you, Mamie, and thank you, Senator Huff, for inviting me to participate with you today.
Thank you, John. And we appreciate your historical perspective, not just your personal perspective spanning 4 decades or longer, but also the recognition of this goes back to the beginning of time. But what has been concerning to us and certainly to the legislature that funded a lot of outreach dollars for this program is just the spike recently. And you touched upon something when looking for you said we have to get to the root causes, miscommunication and revival of old prejudices. Prejudices ebb and flow, right? And it goes back to that tribalism. So do really appreciate your comment. When it comes to Asian discrimination, we've mentioned this before, but the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 was started in California because the Chinese were 10% of the population and the labor force was concerned they were going to continue to take all the jobs. So they decided to just preemptively kick them out of the US, and they got Congress to pass some legislation. And it took until the 40s and really the 60s to reverse that. But it's also jobs now. And you see when the spike started, part of it was blaming, I think, the Chinese for the, we call it the Wuhan virus, the China virus, the Chinese virus, a lot of different names, but that sort of spotlighted one group that everybody else piled onto. And certainly the trade wars didn't, and I consider myself a political moderate as well, different party from you, John, but when we start looking to one group and blaming them for our causes, it's never going to end up in a good place. And I think that probably is what spiked this current growth in the Asian hate crimes, particularly. So let me segue a little bit. So Professor talked about terrorism, and I was thinking about that. Terrorism, as we typically think about it, is an order of magnitude. When you blow up a government building with fertilizer and diesel, or when you use a plane to attack a building. But certainly the same principles are just on a smaller scale when somebody attacks a building or scrawls hate words on that for their ethnicity or sexual preference or race, and those are the things that we primarily deal with here. But we have a question from Sunita that I see in the chat. It says, Dr. Rose, are you seeing a correlation in what the AAPI community is facing today? Is there a fear of taking public transportation, for example, or limiting interactions on the street? Do you have a comment to that?
Well, let me respond this way. COVID, if it's not too indirect for starters, we found a large number of people avoiding public transportation for fear of COVID. So fear does play a role. I'm not quite sure. I should look at the chat question myself and see if I totally understand that. Which number? can you repeat that again, Bob? I
Yeah,
wasn't.
she posted it at 11:24 a.m.
Oh, okay. All right. Let me get, are you seeing a correlation what the AAPO communities face?
Yeah, I got to see things.
Interactions on the street. Well, I have not monitored the situation directly, but I drive through Chinatown a lot on my way home from one of my offices, which is downtown. And, Chinatown's almost a ghost town compared to what it used to be, especially when I think back to when I taught at UC Riverside in the 70s and how vibrant it was there. And some of it is due to economic decline, but I'm sure some of it, and what I've heard, is due to just fear of being in an intensely Asian area and being one of these innocent bystanders of a terrorist attack, not to mention people who are Asian themselves having to be more fearful.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sure that it's a lot more nuanced than that. I know people are concerned for safety. Part of it's attack because you have more homeless people on there, and homeless people, many of them have psychotic episodes that can outbreak on public transportation. But, as is most cases in society, it can be complicated, but we appreciate research by you and others to help drill down through the layers of onion and figure out the underlying causes. Maymay, did you see any other questions in the chat?
No, I didn't.
If any in our media audience wants to ask something, please go ahead. John, I was wondering if you could have any comment on the attack in Colorado recently. Initially it sounded like it wasn't going to be tried as a hate crime, and then, they obviously are going forward with it. And proving that bias is a difficult thing. My understanding is the attacker identified as part of the LGBTQ community, and I haven't seen a whole lot of stuff recently on that. Do you have any information or can comment on that?
I did learn something about the attacker asking to be identified by pronouns they, them, and their. But I guess the media, in looking more closely at the attacker, discovered that never before had the attacker ever identified as a member of the LGBT community, as a member of the trans community, as having any sort of attachment at all to the LGBT community. So whether this is just a sign of more mental illness on his part, or trying to now adapt the label of the community he attacked, who knows? I guess the investigation will uncover more about that. But here in Southern California, I remember when the Pulse nightclub attack happened in Orlando, and I was on the council here, and that happened Gay Pride weekend in Orlando. And that exact same weekend, we had Pride here on Santa Monica Boulevard in West Hollywood. And the Santa Monica police, fortunately and gratefully, stopped somebody in their city that was acting suspicious, asked him where he was going, and he said, oh, he was going to Gay Pride in West Hollywood. They searched his vehicle and discovered a trunk full of assault weapons and ammunition. So a very terrible potential incident that was inspired by copycat crime, copycatting what happened at Pulse, what was underway. But I think this is, a really good point that you raised, Senator, and that is, I think that sometimes people in politics are very vocal and determinate in the way in which they express themselves, whether it's former President Trump referring to COVID as China flu, which was, in my opinion, a racist comment to make, or people now attacking trans athletes. I mean, politics, I get it. It's the way we hash out public policy. But sometimes the reckless use of language can inspire those who suffer from mental illness or who are not as thoughtful about using criminal acts against communities of people. And so I think that is the problem with people in politics, whether they be elected, appointed, or just activists or advocates, is the language that we use. It can be very, very powerful and influential on those who are unstable. So what is the solution? Content regulation? I don't think we can do that. Not in a free democracy. We can't control people's thoughts or thinking or words. Thomas Jefferson actually had a solution, one of the founding fathers. He suggested that the answer to toxic speech was more speech, that the truth tellers had to get the truth out whenever there was toxic speech around or in the neighborhood. So I think that that is really an important component of all this, is that rather than regulate content on the internet or regulate content on Twitter, which, by the way, I don't think is possible, rather than thinking about regulating speech, make sure that truth breaks through. Make sure that there are more voices speaking the truth to clear up the disinformation rather than trying to cut off speech. I just don't think we can live in an authoritarian government ruled by the left or the right, either one. And that is just, one of the prices of liberty that we're going to have to pay, is that toxic speech will get out. And the way to combat it is with more speech about what the truth is.
Yeah, great. Thank you, John. And I see we have another question that has popped up from Celeste. So question for the group, and this is segueing into something I was just thinking about as John was speaking. Do you think that education can play a role in preventing racism? If so, what kind of education, i.e. should it begin in the schools, government created content, social media, etc.? Either of you care to comment on that? John, go ahead. You're muted. John, were you raising your hand?
Okay, yes. Now the host just allowed me to unmute. Now I'm unmuted. I think that these are all important places. Of course, schools, education in schools. But I think the problem with government created content is sometimes we try to go to the lowest common denominator and end up completely washing out any differences or distinctions depending upon which political party is controlling the legislature at any one time. I actually was going to say the other place that we need to look at, I'm sitting here in Hollywood. I have got within a stone's throw 4 or 5 studios, not to mention television studios nearby, also on Fairfax. We as content creators in Los Angeles do control a lot of content in television, in music, in art, in movie making, and making sure that the content and education also happens in places like that. I think we're seeing it evolve. I think we're seeing more women as heads of studios. We're seeing more people of color involved as producers and directors and content creators. And I think that's one of the ways that Los Angeles plays a key role, is in cultural content creation. Government inspired content creation, I think, is just bound for failure, because it's just not possible. They say a camel is a horse designed by a committee. I think that's very true, not only in politics, but in this area as well. And so in terms of what we can do, we're seeing it now. Kids are just creating their own content on TikTok. They're creating their own media on Instagram. And some of it's good, some of it's not. And so it's just making sure that wherever this content is being created, we have more content being there as well. I don't have children, but if I did, I don't think I'd want to entrust a cell phone into the hands of anyone under the age of 14. I just think there's so much danger out there. When I was a kid, we played tag and we played hide and seek. I'm afraid to see what kids have the ability to look at on something like this. And so, I think that as time goes forward, besides education in elementary, junior high, and high school, which is important, it can also apply to corporate boardrooms, places of employment. But here in Southern California, we have a specialized role in how the impact of Hollywood can change the culture, not only across our country, but I think globally as well.
And you're right, John. Certainly Hollywood projects, around the world. Mei grew up in Taiwan when she learned English from watching Hollywood shows, right? So sorry to bring in Mei. I thought I'd out you a little bit there, but our impact, our culture does, for good or bad, spin around the world and has both positive and negative outcomes. I'll tell you something, John, did you have any response that you would like to add to this?
Well, somewhat indirectly, I agree with the sentiment that we should be careful about censorship. But there is another means, and that is, there are laws that punish people for inciting others to riot. And is there some way those can be strengthened to find a stronger causal link, or maybe even lower the bar than it is now? And we've got that issue with Trump and all, but just in general, are there connections that can be made that may hold people liable after they've expressed themselves for outcomes that they're partly responsible for that result in hate crimes? Pose this to people who've been legislators.
Mhm. Okay, well, thank you. Within the next month or two, we hope to have on our program some high school and college kids, because we do believe education is a part of this. And perhaps to the point that John Duran was making, I think we need a lot of different inputs. Government itself, I've been around long enough, I've seen some abysmal attempts at trying to create something like that. And yet through the process, we have developed in legislation morphs and changes with input. But we think that an organic participation of our youth brings awareness to them, and awareness helps set the stage to looking for solutions, and in the process, hopefully educating and reaching a wider group, because we have limited funding in California to teach things other than the basic core. We're looking at creating some clubs on campuses to basically highlight it and have different speakers and do something like what we do in this forum, but it would be targeted to high school and college kids. So that's something we're pursuing. Stay tuned to see if it's successful, but a little preview of coming attractions.
Hey, Bob,
Last comments, yes.
there's a comment posted by Sunita, and can you ask John and see if he would like to comment on that?
Okay, John, do you see the chat? It's
Yes,
11.
I see the question about Hollywood promoting stereotypes, and I couldn't agree more. I being Mexican American, when I was a kid, the only things I saw about myself on TV were the Frito Bandito and Speedy Gonzalez, the cartoon character. It wasn't until Cheech and Chong arrived in the 70s that finally I had human beings associated with my culture. And even that was a stereotype. So what needs to change? I think a lot of this is the way that the traditional studio heads have viewed differences. And let's face facts. They're there to make money, right? That's what studios do. They're not there to promote diversity or racial sensitivity. They're there to sell movies and to make money. So they look for the largest markets that they can. But I think that as more and more women and people of color move up the ranks in television production, Broadway shows, in movie production, we'll see more and more points of view being brought to the forefront. And I think it is evolving, and I think it is changing, and I think it will come about as more time passes and there are more challenges to the old guard. And we're seeing it happen, I think, not only in Hollywood, but across all of corporate America. Senator Huff brought up the Chinese Exclusion Act, which of course came out of the minor 49ers trying to keep Chinese immigrants out of their gold mines. Well, I mean, we can go back to the last century. We don't have to go back 2 centuries to see what happened during World War II, when Japanese Americans were rounded up and put in internment camps all across California. And not just Japanese, but anybody Asian got rounded up and had all their possessions taken away and placed into camps. And that is just not something that I think in today, 2023, would be tolerated by our culture, because our culture has evolved significantly since those days. But I think that the more that we have conversations like this, the more that we see diversity showing up in our legislative bodies, in our statewide elected leaders like Treasurer Ma, I think that we will continue to see an evolution of our culture, and not just in our politics, which is necessary, but also in our cultural content. And that's why I think that art plays a very significant role. Art and the human heart can be moved much more significantly than people's heads through politics and legislation. And the heart, the work on the heart, I believe, comes through art and production around television and movie making. So I'll leave it with that. And thank you so much for including me in this great discussion today.
Yep. Thank you, John, for your comments. Professor, you have any last comments before we wrap things up?
No, I just appreciate the invitation. I found this a very valuable event, and thank you very much.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Bob,
Yes.
since there's still a little bit of time, so let's just post something in the chat box. Can you check, please?
Okay, so
Good point.
comment is prison populations to be a part of anti-racist education as well would go a long way toward rehabilitation. Excellent comment. From everything I know of prisons, which is nothing firsthand. Thank you. I do have a brother that's a chaplain in the prison system, and a sister that's involved with that. My mom used to teach at a juvenile hall, so we have a little bit of experience in that area. But certainly when people get into prisons, they get into their little tribes to protect themselves, and that certainly explodes into a lot of vicious attacks on each other. And that's an excellent point. Prisons do need to be a part of anti-racist education. So let me do our little wrap up and we'll get out of here on time. To our media friends, when we pull the material together, we will get this out to you later today. That'll include links to everything that you have seen here. We'll have a copy of the recording as well as a chat, and for you to put together, help you prepare any article that you're going to do or media coverage. We want to especially thank Treasurer Fiona Ma, Professor Adam Rose, former Mayor John Duran for coming on our program today and sharing your insights. It's been a lively discussion, and I enjoy that. That's what I miss probably the most from the legislature, is being in that marketplace of ideas and sharing thoughts. But we appreciate you coming here. It's our goal to bring the thoughts and experiences of a diverse pool of speakers to our media audience to give them fresh material on which they can report and new sources for them to cover. Our goal is not just to talk about it, but to find real, meaningful, and lasting solutions. As a diverse society, we must aspire to be respectful, compassionate, nonpartisan, and inclusive. The future we are creating today must overcome hate, and we here at Act Against Hate Alliance, with your assistance, hope to help lead the way. Be sure to mark your calendar for next month's briefing. We're shifting it a week later to January 18th because of the holidays. Normally we do it on the second Wednesday of the month, but next month will be January 18th, 11 a.m. And we appreciate you taking note of that. And of course, you'll be getting a reminder in the mail. Thanks for attending. That concludes today's program. Thanks again to our speakers. Hope you all have a very happy holiday season.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.